Welcome back to Morning Joe. Joining us now, former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, Joyce White Vance. She was one of the first 5 U.S. attorneys nominated by then-President Barack Obama, unanimously confirmed by the Senate. She retired, though, in January, hours after President Trump was sworn into office. Joyce, it's good to see you. Welcome.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
We were just talking, and Joe will be happy to know that you're a professor at the University of Alabama, so you want to get it out of the way, a little roll tide?
Roll tide.
Roll tide, Joe.
Okay, there it
Roll
is.
tide.
Yes, and we're not talking about what happened in Nashville a couple weeks ago when Alabama came to visit.
Rolled over.
Yes, we did. I want to ask you, Joyce, about this Google story. Just another social media outlet turning up Russian-backed ads, political ads. What can be done there? Is there anything that we can do to moderate what's happening on Twitter and Facebook and Google in terms of Russia's influence in our politics?
You know, it's an important issue that's suddenly, I think, hitting all of us at once. The problem that we have is that the technology developed faster than the law did, and so we don't necessarily have protections in place. What we need to see now is a focus on what sort of, whether it's regulation or whether it's information being brought to the public, will help people consume this information in a way that makes its influence less pervasive.
So do you think government has a role in that? Is there a law that can be passed? Is there a governing body that should exist?
What we don't have in the area of the internet is what we have in other sorts of communications. We don't have anything that requires disclosure of where information comes from. So, for instance, Senator Blumenthal has proposed some sort of legislation that would indicate that the source of this information is Russian or wherever it comes from. What we need to see here is a bipartisan effort. This is one of those issues that can't be politicized. It's the future of our country at stake. We need to go to the American people with disclosure about the source of information and understanding how it can be manipulated.
Joe?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that has to be frustrating to law enforcement officers is the internet has this false barrier, this false wall that has been built up. And we, as a people, news organizations, prosecutors, courts, have to act differently towards it. We're talking about Facebook now. We said before, if Walter Cronkite had 65% of Americans getting their news from CBS News in 1974, and he allowed Russians to come on and just spit out Russian propaganda, Congress would regulate. They simply wouldn't. You look at the San Bernardino shooter. They had his phone. Apple wouldn't even cooperate with them. They had his property. Apple wouldn't let them get in the phone, wouldn't help them get in the phone when they knew all the steps to get into the phone. And yet, what people don't understand is the government has the ability to kick down your door, search your rooms, turn everything upside down with a search warrant. You have a search warrant for a phone. Silicon Valley says, oh, no, there's nothing to see here. Doesn't that have to change?
This is a concept called going dark in law enforcement. It means that technology has reached the point where law enforcement actually can't see what's going on inside of the iPhone. You're exactly right, Joe. We need to have some effort to catch the law up to the technology so that law enforcement with probable cause, protection of people's privacy rights under the Fourth Amendment, but once there is probable cause, law enforcement can access information about criminal activity to protect the public.
Joe, I actually think what...
And that's the thing, you know, Richard, that's the thing. If law enforcement has probable cause, then law enforcement can go in, they can seize your bank records, they can go into your house, they can seize everything in your house. There's nothing that you have on your phone, emails, text, you name it, that law enforcement can't get.
So I have to push back a little bit, though, and say that law enforcement can't go in and toss everything and take everything. But they can, with reasonable restrictions, access this information.
Well, right. I'm talking about once you have probable cause. If they have probable cause to go in and do that, they've got the ability to do that. But for some reason, and we're seeing it with Facebook, too, here, for some reason, again, that phone is treated differently under the law than everything else, and it just doesn't make sense. Richard?
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's actually part of a larger thing, and you were getting at it. These companies have been treated with the kind of privilege in every single domain of American life. They've been free from antitrust. They've been allowed to not cooperate with law enforcement when Apple decided not to. Now they're basically they're communications or broadcasters, and they're immune from that. I actually think the biggest debate operate in America over the next year or two, and it might be one of the very few things that bring left and right together, I'd be curious your view on this, is that we basically say the era where these companies are unregulated, they are essentially free to decide how they operate, is over. And the question will be, what do you go after, what do you protect? But I think that issue is emerging big time, and I think it's going to be something that left and right will both start targeting.
I think you're absolutely right, and we've just seen that focus on this issue start in the last week. Where it goes over the next few months will be important. We don't want an overreaction,
right,
and that's always the risk in these situations.
Gene Robinson?
And my question is just that. How do you do this in a constitutional way? How do you protect freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of association, those basic freedoms, and at the same time give law enforcement license to root around in a way that some people would see as intrusive?
You know, it's a tall order, and this is a real moment in American history. It could, in fact, be the moment we're all looking for, where a bipartisan effort on the Hill to have hearings, to examine these issues thoroughly, to take them to the public, results in both productive legislation, but also a real understanding of how the Russians manipulated our election, how they tried to manipulate American voters. This could be the coming together moment that we need if it's handled properly by responsible adults.
Carol?
Yeah, you know, talking about the Russia investigation, you know, how do you're saying this could be a moment? How do you see what would be good prescriptions for this, and what are types of things that you think you know, Democrats and Republicans could actually agree on?
It'll be important, I think, to keep everyone in their lane. Bob Mueller has a lane, engaging in criminal investigation here, but prosecutors have always played a role in looking forward and seeing what sorts of new legislation we need. So I think that there can be some insight that comes out of the Mueller investigation that can be used by folks up on the Hill. They'll then need to really assess, and I think the most important point is, from this very fair-minded point of view, protecting First Amendment rights, access to the internet, but also thinking about how do we help Americans become smarter consumers of information which can be manipulated, as we've unfortunately learned here.
And Joyce, I want to go back. I want to just circle back to something I said before about what the government can and what the government can't get. If you I guess if you ask most people, well, you know, what's in a phone? And this phone is protected and the government can't get inside the phone. That's not the case. Everything that you have on your phone, and this is what makes no sense, your bank records, they can go to the bank. Mueller could get your bank records. Just ask Donald Trump. All of your texts, they can get all of your texts, all of your emails, again, with a proper and measured search warrant that's focused on what they need. They can get your emails. They can get everything that you carry around on your phone, except for information like in WhatsApp, which is specifically used to frustrate law enforcement officers, which is why terrorists who want to kill Americans use something like WhatsApp. And so, again, it's like Richard said, at what point do we start treating technology companies like every other company in America?
So I think you're exactly right. The WhatsApp problem is a well-known issue for law enforcement, particularly when they're pursuing certain sorts of sensitive information, investigations where they need to access information quickly. And we're long overdue for a conversation about regulating these companies in a reasonable way that permits law enforcement to keep all of us safe. At the end of the day, law enforcement isn't breaking into your phone to see what's in your photo library. They're really trying to do their job and keep the American people protected from harm.
And Joe, if we don't do it here, it's going to happen anyhow. What we're seeing in Europe and around the world is the free reign of these companies is coming to an end. So this is happening globally. We had better figure out what we want in this country.
Well, and again, it's so important. We've been talking about this now for the past couple of weeks for a lot of reasons. This is the law enforcement angle of it, where you have an app that's created specifically to frustrate law enforcement officers, and which is why terrorists love those sort of encrypted apps. But also, again, with Facebook, I will say it again. This is a company that more Americans get their news from Facebook than any other outlet. Over 50%. There's not been any news outlet that powerful in American history, and yet they're free without any government oversight at all to publish whatever they want to publish. And it's very problematic. And like Richard said, it's something that our government, as dysfunctional as it is, they need to fix this.
You have to balance the privacy versus security is what we're talking about, not just physical security, but of our elections and our democracy, essentially. Joyce Vance, always good to see you, U.S. Attorney, and perhaps more impressively, someone who owns a parking spot on game day in Tuscaloosa. That is incredible. Joyce, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, members of the Oversight Committee have plenty going on these days. They're digging into Jared Kushner's emails while also investigating the use of private jets by the president's cabinet. We'll talk to the top Democrat on the committee, Congressman Elijah Cummings, straight ahead on Morning Joe.